Let's return to the Gospel of John. We are now in John chapter 19, verse 16b, the second half of 16, 17, and 18. And here in these three verses, we read about how the Lord Jesus Christ was taken away and crucified. These three verses close the paragraph made up of verses 12 through 18, which tell of the final decision that he must be crucified. Matthew, Mark, and Luke recount more of the events of his journey to Golgotha. The details recorded by John differ from, but do not contradict, the details given in those three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The four Gospels accurately record that event, but they have their own particular emphases that support their particular purposes and the needs of their particular original readers. Chapter 19, verse 16b. Now they took Jesus and led him away. The soldiers assigned to crucify the Lord Jesus took him and led him to the place of crucifixion. There's a minor textual problem at the end of this verse. The critical text reads, "Therefore they took Jesus," but most of the manuscripts, and I think the better quality, read, "Now they took Jesus and led away." The word him is supplied in the English translation just to make a better English sentence. There's no corresponding word in the Greek text of this verse. This is actually fairly normal for this verb led, ago. Just like in this verse, the verb ago has no direct object in at least 11 other verses. Perhaps at that time the Roman soldiers gave the flogging which is described in Matthew 27:26 and also Mark 15:15. And please see the video about John 19:1 for an explanation of the three types of whippings that the Romans gave. Chapter 19, verse 17. And carrying his cross, he went out to a place called the place of the skull, which is called in the language of the Hebrews, Golgotha. The critical text lacks the first use of the word place in this verse, but it is there in the majority text, and I think it should be there. It was Roman custom that the victim had to carry his own cross. What was carried was actually the horizontal part of the cross. Carson quotes Plutarch, who said, "Every criminal must bear his own cross as part of his punishment." The Lord Jesus carried his own cross, perhaps all the way out past the city walls. The three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, explain that Simon of Cyrene was forced to carry his cross. Is this contradictory? A simple resolution of this apparent contradiction would be that Simon began to carry the cross of the Lord Jesus outside the city walls because there the Lord Jesus was exhausted and just could not carry that horizontal beam anymore. The three synoptic Gospels tend to emphasize the theme of the suffering of the Lord Jesus, so they emphasize that the Lord Jesus was so weak that he was unable to carry his cross all the way to Golgotha. John's emphasis is on the obedience of the one who was sent by God. So in accordance with John's emphasis and burden, John only tells that the Lord Jesus carried his own cross. Often this passage is linked to Genesis 22:6. Both Isaac and the Lord Jesus had to carry the wood to the place of sacrifice. One passage in a rabbinic literature, this is Jewish literature, passages Genesis Rabbah 56:4, it says that Isaac carried the wood, quote, as a man carries a cross on his shoulders, close quote. According to many rabbis, the blood of the sacrifices in the temple was empowered to forgive sins because of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac. And Rabbi Ishmael, in his commentary on Exodus 12:13 in Melchitah, said, "When I see the blood," and that means the blood of the Passover lamb in Egypt, "then I will pass over you. I see the blood of the binding of Isaac." That is the quote, and it's as if God were speaking. So the rabbis of Israel themselves argued that there was a connection between Isaac's sacrifice and crucifixion, and that Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac was linked to the forgiveness of sins by sacrifice. Of course, a Christian reading of Genesis 22 will see many parallels between that event and the sacrifice of the Son of God. But the actual textual connection in the Bible between those two events is very limited. The location of Golgotha, the place of the skull, is difficult and controversial. Christian songs have it on a hill, but the New Testament speaks only of a place, not a hill. Outside the Damascus gate of Jerusalem's walls, just behind the Arab bus station, there is still a hill that clearly has the appearance of a skull. Photographs taken of that hill prior to the building of the bus station show that the asphalt of the bus station's parking area now covers what you would say the mouth part of the skull, what appears to be a skull, in the hillside. But its eyes are still visible. However, one snowy night in the winter of 2016-2017, the earth and the stone composing what you might say is the nose collapsed, so that the nose and eyes of this hillside are no longer as dramatically visible. So you have to look at old pictures to look at that place and say, oh, that does look like a skull. That place is called Gordon's Calvary, after Major General Charles Gordon, who popularized the site among Protestants. Nearby, there is a Jewish tomb carved in the solid stone hillside with an old-style cross scratched into an inner wall. Outside that tomb, there's strong evidence that the place was once a garden. There's a wine press for pressing grapes. There was a vineyard there. There is a large cistern carved into the stone underground for storing rainwater so that the garden, the vineyard, could be watered during the dry season. That tomb is called the Garden Tomb, and if it was not the Lord's actual tomb, it is nevertheless very much like what that tomb was like. Catholic and Orthodox Christians hold to a site over which a large church has been built, which stands inside the relatively modern walls of Jerusalem. According to them, the place was known as Golgotha because of a tradition that Adam's skull was buried there. The word Golgotha, that's an Aramaic word, Golgotha, and it means the skull. Aramaic, as we have mentioned in other videos, was the language of the Hebrews during that time period. The closely related Hebrew word is Gulgolet, and it's found in Judges 9:53 and also 1 Chronicles 10:10. Many Christians are familiar with the corresponding word in Latin, Calvaria. Concerning the expression, the language of the Hebrews, you can see the video that discusses chapter 19, verse 13, but in short, the expression, the language of the Hebrews, refers to the Aramaic language, which, as I said, was at that time the language used by the Hebrews. Chapter 19, verse 18, where they crucified him, and with him 2 others, on this and on that side, but Jesus in the middle. At the place of the crucifixion, the crucified person was forced to lie down, and the horizontal beam was nailed or tied to his arms. Then the horizontal beam and the crucified person were lifted up, and the horizontal beam was attached to the vertical beam. After that, the person's feet were tied or nailed to the vertical beam. Sometimes a piece of wood was attached to the vertical beam to become a kind of a chair, which in fact increases the suffering of the crucified person, because that would allow for more stretching upward for breath as the victim struggled for air. The four Gospels tell of his crucifixion, but do not give details about the enormity of the suffering of those who were crucified. The sufferings of crucifixion were well known in every part of the Roman Empire. According to Beasley Murray, the writings of Cicero, Tacitus, Josephus, and Callistratus mention crucifixion as one of the most terrible and cruel punishments. In Isaiah 53:12 it says, "And with transgressors he was numbered." Perhaps that's why John so thoroughly explained the position of his cross with on this and that side, but Jesus in the middle. According to Matthew 27:38, 27:44, and Mark 15:27, they were robbers, lates, just like Barabbas in John 18:40. Only Luke 23:40 through 43 records that one of the two men believed in the Lord Jesus. That's John 19, the second half of verse 16 through 18. In brief summary, in these three verses, we read about how the Lord Jesus Christ was taken away and crucified.